Hey, what's up? You made it all the way to the end. Congratulations. Or so you thought. But there's one more episode. This one's shorter than the other ones, don't worry. But in case you did miss those, Patrick and I already talked about several movies from 1981 that happen to be slasher films. These included Scream, Ghost Keeper, Corpse Mania, Home Sweet Home, A Day of Judgment, Shrigala, Night School, The House Where Death Lives, My Bloody Valentine, Eyes of a Stranger, Murder Obsession, Madhouse, Fun House, Love Massacre, Bloody Moon, Phantom Killer, Bloody Birthday, Friday the 13th Part 2, Graduation Day, The Burning, Happy Birthday to Me, The Fan, Final Exam, Road Games, Blowout, Student Bodies, Deadly Blessing, The House by the Cemetery, and Evil Speak. So stay tuned for the final 13.
Moving on to another movie that, to a movie that genuinely I don't like. I like Evil Speak. Hell Night by Tom DeSimone. 4 college pledges are forced to spend the night in a deserted old mansion where they get killed off one by monstrous surviving members of a family massacre years earlier for trespassing on their living grounds. This is another old dark house meets slasher movie thing. And there's probably like a meaningful cultural connection between sorority, fraternity themed movies and slasher movies both becoming popular around the same time. I don't know what it is, but this is one of those that crosses over between Animal House and Halloween kind of thing. But it's also incredibly boring. It's well shot. It looks nice. And it's starring Linda Blair, so it has some sort of cult appeal there. And she is the final girl, but she's really miscast as the final girl, and she seems bored.
She's not a good actor.
No, I mean, I've seen her be okay in some
She's good in The Exorcist, but like every other movie I've seen her in, it's like, all right, I know that's Linda Blair, and that's neat, I guess, but she's not that good.
And she just is really detached from this role, and there's another actress that would be a better final girl for this particular movie, and
Amy Steele.
Yeah,
let's cast Amy Steele as every final girl.
Amy Steele and everything. I think it's Sookie Goodwin. I'm looking at the cast. I think Sookie Goodwin is the one I'm watching this movie and thinking, well, that would have been the better final.
The only thing I remember about this movie, which I have seen but did not rewatch for this episode, is that it opens with an absolutely fucking rager of a party. I don't know what they did. I don't know if they just went to some kind of crazy party that was already happening and just like caught footage, or if they actually set it up. But like, there's just like fires and people on motorcycles and people screaming and just alcohol flying in the air, and it's absolutely insane before they go to this like abandoned house that's kind of boring and nothing really happens. It promises a raucous good time that it does not deliver on.
Yeah, no, I think the only other interesting thing about this movie is that the director DeSimone had at the time was known almost exclusively for directing gay porn.
Oh, pretty good.
And when you know that, there is you realize there's no on-screen nudity or sex. But at the same time, it does. After you know that, you do realize that the film is ogling men at the same degree that it's ogling women. And I don't know if Tom DeSimone is even gay, but he shot. He shot what he was used to shooting, which was attractive young men. So he did what he did. Anyway, I don't particularly like that one. It has a pretty big cult following, and it had a really nice Blu-ray re-release. But if you like it, that's
I don't
great.
particularly like the next one either, which I did not rewatch for this, but I have seen Don't Go in the Woods.
James Bryan, 4 backpackers decide to take a hike in the mountains of Utah, but within the woods lurks a killer. But who or what is it? Lazy local sheriff blames bears, but escalating body count seems to point towards a human killer. This is one of my favorite awful movies because it's just so slapdash. And I don't usually like movies that are bad just because they're bad. But this one to me has all the things that, and I do think it's laughing at itself sometimes. And I think that it has this sort of outsider art thing going on, where there's a lot of like there's a lot of movies that were made by people who saw slasher movies and said, well, we could do that. We just need some like fake blood and take a camera in the woods. The best case scenario for that is that it's actually a good movie. This is the second best case scenario, where the people involved were all just taken as they were. So there's a scene where they use a plane to go look for the survivors. That scene's in there because they met a guy who could fly a plane. The guy who plays the sheriff is not a Utah sheriff, but he is an actual lawman from Dallas, and he brought his own costume. So he plays the sheriff. I just get the feeling that the one actress is painting when she gets killed because she happened to be a painter. I just assume. They knew someone with a kid, so there's a kid in a scene. They knew someone who had a old van that they were willing to bash up, so there's a whole set piece built around the killer pushing a van down a hillside and then it blows up. I find it charming. It is terrible, and it is overlong, like a lot of these movies are, but it doesn't have as much filler as a lot of those really long, terrible kind of B movies, or Z movies in this case. And there's one really funny moment where the protagonists are kind of gathered together, and they know there's the killer out. And the killer is... I don't think this was made to be a slasher movie. I think this was made to be a Hills Have Eyes kind of situation, because the killer looks like Papa Jupiter.
Oh, weird.
From Hills Have Eyes, to me at least. But there's a part where they're hiding from him, and they get a big stick and they jump around the corner and they go, aha, and they stab some poor jogger who just happens to be running by, and the guy who stabbed him just goes, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. As he's just like just bleeding.
My chief memory of this movie is trying to figure out how a movie with this low a budget had this many actors. Like, I know they're quote unquote actors, but it's like you still have to like coordinate people getting out there.
Yeah. Well, that explains why. I mean, there are like 4 characters that are together for the movie, but almost all the other people are separate from them. So there'll be killings on other sides.
You're
of the
right.
forest. And that's how you do it. This was another one that was part of the Video Nasties list. And I have documentaries about the Video Nasties, and so I can't remember who said this, unfortunately. But one of the critics said that their theory on why some of these really awful movies were banned is because they were so amateur, and the gritty quality of shitty VHS tapes made it seem dangerous. Like these were actual crazy people, and that these movies shouldn't be passed around. And that it wasn't until we had, like, people saw them in theaters, and then they had Blu-rays and DVDs and stuff, that people, like, their scariness went away.
That makes sense.
This does do the sleeping bag kill before the Friday the 13th movies.
Against a tree?
As well. Yeah. Well, no, I guess not. They hang him up and then stab him. Like.
Okay, pretty good.
But they do it twice because it works so well the first time. Anyway. I enjoy it. It's awful. It's got a surprisingly good Blu-ray from Vinegar Syndrome. So, if you like bad movies and you have like a party coming up, it's a good choice. Which brings us to movie not to play during a party. Lady Stay Dead by Terry Bourke. This is another Ozploitation movie. Millionaire actress singer Marie Colby lives in a luxurious villa on a deserted beach. One afternoon, following a TV commercial shoot at the villa, she incites gardener Gordon Mason to mayhem and murder.
That is victim blaming, is what that is.
The unexpected arrival of Marie's sister Jenny hinders Mason's attempts to dispose of the body. So yeah, this is a rape movie. It's okay made, as like it's not badly made. This director also made Inn of the Damned, which is a better movie, and Night of Fear, which I've never seen, but people consider the first horror movie in a period known as the Australian Renaissance, from the 70s through the 80s. It's covered in the documentary Not Quite Hollywood, but just very briefly. For some reason, this is on YouTube, and it's listed as a Lifetime original.
I thought I had the wrong movie for a second, and then I saw the nudity.
Me too, but yeah.
I was like, all right, this is not a Lifetime film.
It's a sort of, there's a sort of vein of sad maniac movies like Psycho and Movie Maniac, and this is one of them, but it kind of identifies with the maniac a little too much, I think.
Yeah.
And maybe doesn't make him sad enough, because he's obviously, like, the actor who plays him is a well-built, good-looking dude, instead of, a slob. And it sort of starts like one of those movies, but then he is really violent rape scene, and he kills the woman, I guess, by accident. It's sort of implied that maybe he's killed other women. He's definitely raped other women. But that's the only thing that even resembles a slasher movie, is that one scene.
I do like, it has it's like a home invasion movie as well.
It takes a long time to get there.
No, it's true. The pacing is bad. That's kind of the reason, as a thriller, it doesn't work, is because on a moment-to-moment basis, the scenes are well done. It's just like takes forever, and then it's like something happens, and then it doesn't then escalate from there. I really like the setup of like the isolated sort of mansion by the beach, and there's just the one other house there with the dog. Like, I like that whole thing is really interesting geography for the story to take place. And I think at the end, when the cops come, I think that's why he has to be like a really well-built dude, is because he has to be like this really physical threat when they come, because it just keeps going on. It's well done. It's just, it's not a slasher movie. It's
not a rape revenge
movie. It's gross. There's like a scene. There's an absolutely gratuitous scene, but right before she gets raped, where she just sort of takes her top off in the mirror and just fondles herself.
And there's a scene of him watching her on the beach and masturbating.
Yeah, it's like that kind of thing.
That it's one of those things that's just supposed to make you grossed out, and it
works. It does have a very notably unusual not a slasher movie, but it has an unusual kill of someone being held upside down in a fish tank.
To me, it's a failure as a slasher movie, because the guy's a fucking handyman, and he hardly uses any handyman tools to kill anybody. He eventually whips out a chainsaw, and he only uses it to open a door. And it's not a great home invasion movie because, well, actually, my favorite scene is when he's trying to home invade, and she's just defying him at every turn, the sister. That was amusing to me, that she is able to, and he's kind of whiny about it. I like that scene. Where there's like, he's trying to stab her with something, and she grabs it and pulls it in a way that it stabs him. I thought that was genuinely amusing.
It doesn't quite go full Wes Craven at the end, but it's a little bit.
Yeah, but then the cops show up, and it just sort of becomes a shootout movie. And I guess the other slasher thing is that he gets knocked off a 2-story building and disappears in the next shot, so it's kind of Halloween. Mm-hmm. And then there's also a dingo dog in this one, and I tried to figure out if it's the same dingo dog that's in Road Games, but I couldn't find it.
Man, that dingo dog in Road Games is a great dingo dog.
Yeah, this one's not in as long, but anyway, I did not like this movie, and I really do like Australian exploitation movies from this era.
I did like this movie a little bit, but I was disappointed that I really liked it in like the first 25 or 30 minutes, and then it sort of didn't go anywhere, and I was disappointed.
Well, that brings us to one that I do like. Joe Giamotto's Absurd, also known as Rosso Sangue, also known as Horrible, also known as Anthropophagus 2, also known as The Monster Hunter, also known as Grim Reaper 2, and if you're lucky enough to find it on VHS tape in America in the 80s, it was called Zombie 6, Monster Hunter. He made this movie. Joe D'Amato is the most common pseudonym for Aristide Massacre. He made this one under the name Peter Newton. I'm going to call him D'Amato from here on out because it's easier to say that name. He is sort of an Italian equivalent to Jess Franco, as I was kind of saying earlier, due to his massive work output and the fact that he made a lot of porn. and that he could be an genuinely good artist. I'm saying genuinely a lot. He could be a real artist, and he was a very good photographer and cinematographer, but he usually didn't care. So he just made whatever he wanted to make. So he's never had the following that Fulci and Argento and Bava have. But he did make some really, I almost said genuinely good, some really good horror movies. Beyond Darkness is just called Bio Omega, and Buried Alive, I think, is a really great shock movie. And the one just before this, Anthropophagus, also known as The Grim Reaper, that was a huge hit for him, and he had made it under his own production company for almost no money. He says Anthropophagus actually cost him less money than most of his pornos. So it made so much money that he was able to go out on his own. And Absurd was one of the first movies he made under this company. It's described as a man has been driven insane by church-sanctioned scientific experiments, which also cause him to be nearly impossible to kill. He is pursued to America by a priest, where he embarks upon a killing spree while the priest tries to hunt him down and kill him. That's pretty much it. This started as a sequel to Anthropophagus. Both of them feature George Eastman in the lead role in the role of a killer. George Eastman's whose real name is escaping me right now, Luigi Montefiore, was just this giant man who tried to be a romantic lead, and it didn't really work out for him. And so he was mostly in pornography and monster roles like this. But he was also a writer, and he co-wrote this one, I believe. And so this started as Anthropophagus is a pretty good slasher as far as that goes. It has a really long, boring streak in the middle, but I kind of like it. This one is way less boring, but also doesn't have quite the same highs. But instead of making Anthropophagus sequel, they decided to do their weird version of Halloween, basically, is what this is. There's a babysitter. It's actually two babysitters. And there's a disabled girl, which is kind of a callback to Anthropophagus, where there's a blind girl. And it has this similar ending to Halloween 2, but I guess that was a coincidence, where the killer is blinded.
Oh, yeah. You don't think that they possibly could have ripped it off?
I mean, this technically was released first, so it would have been pretty hard.
I suppose you're right. The rest of it kind of felt like Halloween as well, or there was moments that felt like Halloween to me.
Well, I think that it's like Halloween if instead of a it's the very Italian Halloween, because instead of a psychologist, it's a Vatican priest.
That was the part. It was the Donald Pleasance factor.
But like the idea that there's a church-sanctioned scientific experiment that turned a man into like a Wolverine level healing factor killer. And it's explicitly stated that the Catholic Church has an official biochemistry division. Like that's a movie that needs a sequel just for that part.
It takes place on the Super Bowl.
It takes place at the Super Bowl in America, but they're all eating spaghetti and in white spackle villas. I
think part of the fun of watching Italian films set in America is all the like ways it gets America completely wrong. I think I've never seen a movie like that does it as hilariously as Absurd.
And somehow I looked into it. They got actual footage of the previous year's Super Bowl. I don't know how that happened. I guess that just means
I'll tell you how it happened. Written express consent.
Yeah. But the Italians never cared about that shit. But it clearly was for real because it's been released on Blu-ray. And I don't think that Severin Films would want to pay the NFL $1 million for that content. So they obviously paid for it. It's just crazy to me. I guess Christine said all the names were wrong, but it was footage. I looked up the year. It was the 1980 Super Bowl. It's pretty funny. It's got really good kills.
Uh-huh. There's a kill that's very reminiscent of City of the Living Dead with the drill.
Yeah, only this time it's a different kind of drill. Or is it a jigsaw?
It's not. It's like a drill that goes through someone's head instead of a jigsaw.
That's right.
But like the way the whole thing is staged and everything made me think of City of the Living Dead,
which I'm sure D'Amato had seen. And there's the scene where the nanny, who I guess is also the nurse, I'm not sure what her role is, gets put in the oven.
Oh man,
is surprisingly effective makeup job. It's basically just a magic trick where every time they cut away, they're adding, or an editing trick where they're just adding more stuff to her. But it's really effective because I guess I don't know what it would look like if someone's face burned. I just assume I know what it looked like, and if it looked like this,
it's also novel because it's the sort of thing you would never see in any other movie. Because who would hold their hand in an oven as it happened? But he has the healing factor, so
he has the healing factor.
It's outside of the box.
And it's the idea that they have to have a reason why he can't be killed, unlike Halloween, which they're emulating.
Well, what's funny is this came out before Halloween 2, and before Halloween 2, there wasn't really a unstoppable Terminator kind of a slasher. Halloween 2 is where Michael Myers starts to be like that, and this beat that to the punch. So this could be, you could also say this is I don't know, the first. I'd have to watch a bunch of movies from the 80s stuff, but from 1980. But it could be the first sort of unstoppable killer in a slasher movie.
I mean, it's at least the first unstoppable killer that is explained as an unstoppable killer, rather than just being a guy who is hard to kill. But yeah, I'm a fan of this one, and I'm glad that it finally got an official home video release.
It's funny. I first saw this in an earlier DVD release under the title Horrible, and Italian titling. I just can't keep anything straight. So I started watching this under the title of Absurd, and I'm like, you know what this reminds me of? This reminds me of that movie Horrible. And then I looked it up, and I'm like, oh, Horrible was directed by Joe D'Amato too. Interesting. It's weird. I guess he had a thing. And then I kept watching, and I'm like, Joe D'Amato made 2 movies about mutants during the Super Bowl? I had that full-blown guy in the theater who accidentally sees something for a second time under a different name experience, where it took me 20 minutes to figure out that I had already seen this before. The ending shot is the second best ending shot of any slasher movie that we're going to talk about.
The girl holding the head.
I guess the other one is not the ending shot, but it's close enough that it's so good. They just open the door and she's there and she's just kill the motherfuckers. She holds up the head.
You know, I just now realized this is the second movie we've covered where trauma breaks somebody out of.
Yeah, I was about to say they also have the Eyes of a Stranger school of psychology at work here.
At least this time she's not sexually assaulted.
Right.
She is threatened with murder, and her condition is not described very well. She's just in bed with.
But it is implied that she's just well, you'll move when you're ready to, when you want to. It is implied it's her fault. One day you won't be so lazy.
But speaking of good endings,
hell yeah.
Jeff Lieberman's Just Before Dawn.
Let's get to it.
5 campers arrive in the mountains to examine some property they have bought, but are warned by the forest ranger that a huge machete-wielding maniac has been terrorizing the area. Ignoring the warnings, they set up camp and start disappearing one by one.
Jeff Lieberman is my dude. I love Squirm. Squirm is just a movie that lives in my heart, along with all the worms. Yeah. And I think Blue Sunshine's a lot of fun, and he has a direct-to-video horror movie called Satan's Little Helper that's super underrated and a lot of fun.
I haven't seen that one, but Squirm is a movie that is misplaced among the sort of Mystery Science Theater.
Absolutely.
I think it's actually a pretty good
movie. Well, it's one of those things where the way they edited it for time made it seem worse than it actually was, where it cut out vital things. So it's well, wait, why is this happening? When you watch it on an MSC3K, but when you watch it as an actual movie, you're like, oh, this is good. This feels almost like a Richard Bachman novel or something.
Yeah. I think Just Before Dawn is maybe one of the only movies that we could probably hand the Blu-ray to some modern teenagers at a sleepover, and they would kind of be into it, and it would at least sort of
depending on the teenagers. I think you're right. Yeah.
Yeah. It's all about atmosphere. It's not a particularly subtle movie. It's not a particularly original movie. Apparently it was handed to Lieberman as something called the Tennessee Mountain Massacre, which gives you an idea that this was really a Texas Chainsaw Massacre or Hills Have Eyes kind of thing. It has he claims Deliverance was influence, which you can also see because it's about dickhead city folk going into the country and messing with things they don't understand and getting killed by rednecks.
Inbred.
Yeah, and it fits the exploitation thing, and it opens with a murder scene, which is very 80s slasher. There's a last vestige of a society scene where a ranger station. They go to a ranger station, and the ranger, who's played by George Kennedy, who actually is perfectly fine. George Kennedy's always great because he can be in B movies and he'll give a pretty good effort in them. Certain actors that will be in B movies and don't give a shit. He warns them not to do something and they do it anyway. And they almost pick up a hitchhiker, I think is a tribute to Chainsaw Massacre. But if they actually leave him and then he gets killed anyway, there's a skinny dipping scene, which is
wait, does he get killed?
Wait, you're right. He makes it back, doesn't he? He makes it back to
right.
You're right. He doesn't die, but they don't pick him up. There's a really great skinny dipping scene, which is the play on nobody actually dies in it, but like, so, you know, you're roughhousing with your boyfriend and he keeps going at you under the water and you're like, haha, that's cute. And then he keeps doing it and he's doing it right now. And then you look and you realize he's already come out of the water. And that means someone you don't know is under the water touching you. And that's really
it's a good
well.
setup. That he sets up like a good 4 or 5 really good set pieces, like well thought out. And it seems like basic stuff, but honestly, a lot of slasher movies never get as far as those basic things that make for good suspense and terror. And he absolutely does it. There's a really good, like, I don't know what kind of location scouting they did, if they just knew of some good locations or if they really took their time to find some jaw-dropping visuals, but a lot of movies that are shot in the woods are kind of just like a bunch of trees. And then there's outside of the bunch of trees, there's a pond and stuff like that. And this movie the wilderness has such character. It's so intimidating. And the way he'll do those like zoom outs to show how isolated and screwed they are. It's honestly, nature is really frightening to me. I don't like being out in nature. It really messes with me, and I don't find it like relaxing or calming or fun at all. And very few movies are actually able to like capture that. I feel like this and Predator are the 2 best examples I've seen of like a respectful awe and fear of nature. And I think this even, at least as far as landmarks go, it looks a little more interesting than Predator. My problem with this...
Because Predator is really trying to...
it turns into that. But like, if you want, like the first like act or whatever of Predator, you really do get like a real fear of the jungle going on. It's really thick that they have to cut through. My problem with this movie is I don't like the redneck family. Because to me, it's all about them being isolated and alone. And the idea of like, oh yeah, there's just this house here, like kind of kills it. And then I think the pacing from like the introduction of the redneck family on is kind of not that good.
And they seem to have been added purely to call back to Hills Have Eyes to me. Especially the one good girl.
That's very Hills Have Eyes, you're right.
Yeah. So I don't particularly like that either. There's a cool thing where there are actually 2 killers. There's twins, and there's a fantastic reveal of that.
Yeah.
This is not the only movie with more than one killer, but it's a movie that doesn't imply that there's more than one killer. And then, someone's getting killed, you think the character outside is safe, and then she gets killed too because there's 2 of them, which is like in Wes Craven's Scream. It explains how they can be in 2 places at once throughout the rest of the movie.
And when you watch this movie knowing that, it does sort of tip that off a little bit. Like, it's not a cheat, it's not a arbitrary decision. Like, he plays with that early on where you don't necessarily notice that the killer couldn't be in 2 places at once. Man. Yeah, this movie's really good.
And there's a thing that Deliverance and to a certain degree Southern Comfort does that this does, where the redneck killers are really part of the environment, and that's part of why introducing the family doesn't work, because it humanizes the people living there. And
what's crazy about it is like the redneck killers have such a distinct, wild look, but you never get a good look at them, even though they're not wearing masks. and they still have a very striking appearance. The camera, they're almost never in focus. There's basically no close-ups of their face. And the way that Final Exam doesn't work, as far as having a killer that isn't hidden, like this movie is an example of how to do that and wring the most effectiveness out of it, where because you have never gotten a good look at them, and because they're not necessarily wearing a mask or concealing their identity, it makes you sort of push in a little closer to the screen to try to like make out the details. Yeah. And so like all of the times in the movie where one of Jeff Lieberman's chief moves is sort of like in the background, out of focus, you see movement of a character jumping from one tree to another or something like that. Like all that is way more effective because of that choice.
Another thing about this movie that I think is easy to miss, but at the same time is maybe a little too heavy-handed, is the idea that the final girl transforms in these movies from like a virginal young woman into a sort of fighting machine, like what we were talking about earlier with trauma making women
stronger. Sure, they become
theme.
More masculine.
Right, and in this movie, it's kind of literal, where she starts like wearing less clothing. She starts like, she ties her top so her belly is revealed. She starts wearing shorts. All the while, the killers are picking up articles of clothing from the people they've killed. So like glasses and a hat and a jacket.
Oh, that's right.
And I think that the idea is that she's becoming more savage while they're becoming more city. And maybe that's part of how she can beat them. Like I think there's a little, not necessarily supernatural thing going on there, but like thematic thing going on there, because the way she kills the last guy is the most visceral, savage thing in any slasher movie, as far as what women do to men. And she's getting bear hugged, and her boyfriend, who's played by Greg Clark, who's always pretty good, and Greg Clark is being overly masculine throughout the movie, but now he's at a point where he just doesn't have it in him to fight, and she has to protect him essentially, but she's being bear hugged and she can't figure out how to get out of the bear hug, so she just lets out this primal scream and shoves her fist down the guy's throat to like almost the elbow and holds it there until he chokes to death. And it's just the most I say jaw-dropping again. It's just unbelievable.
It's really, and especially in the context of a movie that has, even more so than most slasher movies, been taking itself seriously. It cares about the characters and their relationships. It does the work of telling a story, even what you were talking about as far as like thematically, like there's meat on the bones. And so you don't expect it to go in that sort of almost reality-breaking direction. But it makes it more effective when it does. It's sort of like the ending of a Tarantino movie or something like that. I mean, obviously, this is something Tarantino ripped off for Inglourious Bastards. And it kind of feels like that, where like the only solution is for the violence at the end to become so over the top that it's like an incredible catharsis.
Yeah, I think it's a great movie, and it's a pretty easy one to watch.
It's very well made. The only other issue I have with it is that the ending where she's under attack from one of them and the guy gets shot and dies, and they don't realize there's another killer. It's like it's kind of kills the momentum. I wish they could have come up with a better. I kind of see what they're doing as far as like she gets saved, but then she has to be the one to do the saving at the end. Like there is a purpose behind it, but I think it kind of kills the momentum a little bit.
Yeah. So it's the right idea, but not.
But it's great. Jeff Lieberman is a really talented director. I don't know. I don't know if there's other movies he made other than those 4 that I've seen that are well regarded. But I like him a lot. Now, speaking of another really interesting, strange film, Strange Behavior,
also known as Dead Kids. That's how it was recently released on Blu-ray. Directed by Michael Laughlin. This is sold as an Ozploitation movie, but I think all of its Australianness is coincidental.
It takes place in Illinois, in central Illinois.
It takes place in Illinois, and almost none of the cast, either they aren't Australian or they're pretending not.
They literally go to Steak and Shake, which means somewhere in Australia they had to recreate a Steak and Shake, which is like my favorite thing in the universe.
I don't think Michael Laughlin is even Australian. Is
I don't
he?
believe so.
I don't think he is. He only made a couple other movies. Strange Invaders is definitely not an Australian movie. Michael Murphy, yeah, he's not Australian. Louise Fleischer is not Australian. So the plot synopsis of this one is: a scientist is experimenting with teenagers and turning them into murderers. This has. So I said earlier that we weren't going to cover Dead and Buried, but this and Dead and Buried are very similar films, and they released the same year, and they're both sort of sci-fi pod people movies that begin like other horror movies. So that one begins like a Crazy Town kind of movie, or even almost a zombie movie. This one begins like a slasher movie. But in both cases, we find out there's more to it than meets the eye.
This feels like this is written by Bill Condon, who had gone to make like Gods and Monsters,
Dreamgirls.
Sure, and it has a very film literate sort of a feeling to it. I don't know. I forget what exactly made me think of that, but it feels like that. It feels, because it has a lot of grounded specifics as far as taking place in Central Illinois, in this like college town, or like near a college, which in this case I think would be like Urbana-Champaign, and the idea of like not wanting to get stuck there, and there's just a lot of interesting character work that you really care about when you're watching it. The weird like crazy 50s sci-fi elements that come in, especially later, feel very camp.
I think it fits in this. There's a sort of thing, like right now we're going through an 80s nostalgia kind of renaissance, if that might be too nice of a word. I think a lot of younger people don't know that in the 80s, at this point, they were going through 50s nostalgia renaissance. And so I think like it was shit like Happy Days and stuff like that. I think that this was very much feeding into that, but in a playful way, like Night of the Creeps was, not in an obnoxious way. Like,
but this is not. But this is not overtly a comedy the way Night of the Creeps is.
Yeah, it will have it. It has dark comedy elements. It's not a jokey comedy. Like Night of the Creeps will make jokes at you. This will have a darkly comedic thing happen that either you will laugh at or you will not laugh at, kind of situation. It reminds me of some of Alex Cox's movies. Tonally, not visually.
Oh, sure, yeah.
And visually, it's kind of Carpenter-esque, I think. It's widescreen, lots of colors, well-used anamorphic frame. It led me to realize that 1981 was the year of the hypodermic needle.
Oh, sure.
Because there's a scene that's a big showstopper in this one where a nurse sticks a hypodermic needle in the main character.
It's the cover of the Synapse DVD.
And also it was one of the covers for the poster, I believe. The Dead and Buried, which we just mentioned, also has a nurse stick a hypodermic needle in the eye. And Halloween 2 also has a hypodermic needle in the eye. And I was reading up on this, and Roger Ebert is quoted as saying he was pretty sure Halloween 2 was the first movie to do that. So obviously it wasn't. These two movies got released first, but maybe 1981 was the first time anybody had thought to put a hypodermic needle in the eye. And these three filmmakers from working in different parts of the world all came to the same conclusion.
They're all like, the time is now. The world is ready for this gross gag.
Yep. So,
it has
visually appealing.
Amazing. Speaking of camp, it has an amazing Halloween party scene with a full-blown choreographed dance number to lightning crashes.
Yeah. Not the song.
Oh no, Lightning Strikes maybe is the actual name of the song I'm thinking of.
Yeah, I think it is. I don't remember, but it's a movie that goes all over the place and might go on a little too long. But if you're okay with it going all over the place, I think it's enjoyable.
I think Dead and Buried is scarier, but I think
Dead and Buried is I like more in just overall.
But Strange Behavior is a really cool, interesting movie that I think right from the get-go I was watching. I'm like, oh, whoa, okay, this is really directed. Like, they know what they're doing here.
Yeah.
This is unusual, and it's honest. Like when you're just like weirdos like us who have just watched 100 horror movies a day for all of our lives, like it can be difficult to find something that genuinely is surprising or has a different feel from what you've seen before, but this does that. I did not see Hospital Massacre. Is this AKA X-Ray?
So, yeah, AKA X-Ray, directed by Boaz Davidson. It is one of a handful of hospital slasher movies, followed shortly by, I would say, Halloween 2 is a mostly hospital slasher movie, and Visiting Hours came out the next year, which is a pretty good hospital slasher movie. And there was a British-made movie. It was called Computer Killers. Also went by the title Horror Hospital. That's not to be confused with Hospital Massacre. It actually had been, I did not rewatch this one for the podcast, so I had to look at my notes. But the description is, while receiving a routine checkup, a beautiful woman is stalked by a maniac out to avenge a childhood Valentine's Day humiliation. So it's sleazy and has a lot of nudity. And I guess the good part of it is that there's this sort of, I don't know if the word, like the movie, what would you call in the movie After Hours, when everything keeps going wrong, but people aren't really noticing that everything's going wrong, only the main character
I don't know.
Where Kafka-esque might be the word.
You could go there.
It almost goes there, where she just goes in for a routine checkup and just can't leave. And she is told that there was something about her tests that need to be checked into, but they never tell her what it is, like if it was something on the x-ray that was wrong. And meanwhile, a crazy person starts killing people in the hospital in pretty elaborate, bloody ways. But like, it's very exploitative and gratuitous as far as nudity goes, that this poor actress is, her physical checkup is like basically played out to ogle. There's way too many fake out scares is what I remember being an issue. But it again, the paranoid part almost works, where you're never sure why she's being kept here. And there other patients seem to have mental illness, and some of the doctors like belong to some cabal that you think might be against her. And so it has a Twilight Zone. It has a Twilight Zone feel to it, but it doesn't quite fit.
This kind of sounds also like it was a genre of paperback thrillers, the kind of like hospital thriller. Sort of like the way John Grisham things can be about like systemic sort of corruption in the legal world. There were thrillers that were about systemic corruption in the medical world, like the book Coma was a really successful one that became a movie.
Yeah, I think that the director Boaz Davidson is pretty famous Israeli producer who produces like everything for Sylvester Stallone to this day, like the Rambo movies, the Expendables movies, that those two ninja movies that nobody saw. He makes a lot of shit, and it has slowly gotten a little more respectable over the years, but it's just sort of interesting from that standpoint that this guy, who is now a shit peddler producer, made this kind of shit slasher movie. But I kind of like it, but not enough to.
Can we talk about Nightmare?
Yeah, let's move on to Nightmare.
I love Nightmare.
Directed by Romano Scavolini, who is a character. The description is: a drug-treated schizophrenic plagued by horrible nightmares escapes from the hospital and goes on a killing spree.
This movie is, because I don't consider House by the Cemetery to be like a true pure slasher, this is my favorite slasher movie of 1981.
It is not like any other Italian horror movie, I don't think. It kind of has the lack of logic that a lot of Italian horror movies have, but this is Scavolini is kind of his own guy, and I think this is a very North American brand of sleaze that he's breaking into here. And I've never particularly liked the second half, but I do think the first half is this very good representation of just nightmare logic.
I think the first half is much better, and I think the last sort of the climax of the film is a letdown. I think so much is building up, like he's coming to the house, and then when he actually gets there, it just can't pay it off well enough. But I love the whole thing. I love all the stuff at the house that feels like Alice, Sweet Alice, or like a Cassavetes movie or whatever, like a Woman Under the Influence. Like, there's just like really down to earth, sort of upsettingly naturalistic domestic turbulence with like a single mother who's at her wit's end and her children that she can't handle. I love the way it's shot. The movie is so striking, even in those scenes. There's a lot of horror movie directors who they'll come to life when they're doing the crazy shit, but when it comes to actually like establishing characters, they sort of just check out. And I think all of those scenes are really interesting and well shot. And there's a lot of depth. There's just like a scene of the mom when she comes home thinking her son has been stabbed, and it turns out it's been a prank. She sort of just retreats into the living room and sits on a couch, and the camera's like shooting her through a doorway or two. And it's just like, oh God, she hates this. She hates being here.
Yeah, she hates her children. She left them alone to go hang out on her boyfriend's boat.
I mean, her boyfriend's boat was like 5 minutes away. They're on the beach, so I don't think.
Yeah, she's definitely at a bad spot by the time we get this movie, and she is not looking.
I don't think she's a great mother. I don't think she's necessarily like absolutely terrible, but
no, something has happened. There's been stuff, and
that's part of the movie is that there's just like little implications here and there of this other world that's going on. You're like, wait a second, what the hell? Like this computer that is just talking to the doctors, telling him where he's going to be. It's like there's almost a ominous, like godlike quality to the computer. And again,
I think that thing is a sort of. That's the one classically Italian thing about the movie is the sort of nonsense of forensic science and psychological
and there's just like
science.
This droning quality. Like at this point, there hadn't been any shot-on-video horror movies. The first one would be next year with Boarding House. But it has that droning quality that I associate with shot-on-video, where like scenes bleed into each other without a lot of logic, but it's always just phenomenal looking. There's amazing tracking like shots that feel like out of a Kubrick movie of the car driving on the coastline and like crossing bridges and stuff as he's getting closer and closer that have so much menace to them. Like it's a genuinely frightening movie. Not the first murder scene, but the murder scene where he takes a woman home from the bar, or he follows her home from her when she was at the bar. Where he's like lying on top of her and stabbing her, and then at a certain point there's like blood all over his hands, and he just like sticks his hand in his mouth, and it's like, oh God, I didn't realize this was that. Okay, it's like so upsetting. It's incredible. This movie is, I feel like it doesn't have necessarily the reputation of some other movies that in its spheres, whether Italian horror or slashers. And I saw this a while ago, but I saw it in bits and pieces because it was like a late night movie at another 24-hour horror film festival at Vet, and I left because I wanted to get some food from McDonald's before it closed at 3 a.m. or something like that. So I missed most of like the first 30 minutes or so, which obviously are like some of the best stuff in it. And it has like kind of a Pieces kind of a thing with the flashback.
Yeah, I think this is the less fun version of Pieces to me.
Less fun Pieces, but scarier.
Yeah, definitely scarier. There's a lot to talk about with this one behind the scenes, and we're going long enough that I'm just going to sort of mention that there's a lot of controversy surrounding whether or not Tom Savini actually worked on the special effects.
There's like an on-set photo of him, but he denies it. And
yeah, he denied it for. Well, it's funny because there's a book by Luca Palmarini from 1996 called Spaghetti Nightmares. That's all just a bunch of interviews, and in that book there's an interview that was taken, the only one at the time as far as I know, where Savini said, no, I didn't actually do that, I just talked to a guy who did it and I gave him some advice. And then Scavolini says no, he absolutely was on set. And then in that book, that photograph
that's still happening to Tom Savini. There's a wrestler in the WWE named Bray Wyatt, and he has recently come back with like a schizophrenic gimmick where he is like an evil clown. It's his dark side, and his light side, he's like a children's television host. And the evil clown mask is really good. And everyone was like, did it. It's Tom Savini. It's Tom Savini. Tom Savini did it. And I'm like, I didn't know Tom Savini was still doing that. And it's like it's done by a company that Tom Savini owns. And I think this is a similar thing where like they were associated, they were affiliated, they were friends, but they weren't actually like coworkers. He didn't actually do the work.
Well, I think part of the problem was it was being advertised in certain countries as having effects by Savini, and so that's when he did official legal action against them. So I think at a certain point he had to pretend like he never had anything to do with it because that part was too far, using his name for advertising. And I wanted, I'm not going to go into this, I decided, I guess, but the interview with Scavolini in this is just awesome because you can tell nobody has spoken to him about his movies in a very long time. And he just goes off and he talks about how there's no such thing as Italian Gothic horror films. And the guy's like, "What do you like, Argento?" "No, fuck Argento." "And I hate Fulci." And he says, Argento's films never made any money in America, which isn't true. And he claims Carpenter, Spielberg, Craven, and Romero are all simple men. And Spielberg and Tobe Hooper had, made it. It is 96. It's way past Poltergeist. But then he makes fun of Poltergeist a bunch. And he tells everybody, that this is the most popular cult film in all of America. Trust me, I know. He has a sort of like, between the Italian to English translation and way he's bragging and in lying basically in ways that can be proven, it's very Donald Trump-esque the way this interview goes.
I gotta read this. I didn't end up reading this, so I gotta read this.
I sent you another interview with him that took place years later, and it's much more
I see.
And almost disappointing. But I'll try to just take a picture, a scan of this one because it's not.
I got it. This is another movie that makes me want to spend however much on a region-free player, because the only Blu-ray available is from Code Red in America, at least, is from Code Red, which is like out of print and super expensive and probably not so good. But 88 Films has one, so I'm like, I don't know, if you just got a Blu-ray player, you could watch Nightmare anytime you wanted. Dark Night of the Scarecrow is the only TV movie on our list.
Yeah. Oh, I forgot to mention, Nightmare was released under Nightmare on a Damaged Brain in the UK. It's another Video Nasty. And when its theatrical run, when distributor David Grant reportedly refused to make cuts, he was sentenced to 18 months in prison. That might just be legend, but anyway.
If so, he's the only person imprisoned for the Video Nasties things, right?
It was actually pre-Video Nasties, and then it was just he refused to cut footage from the theatrical.
Wow.
And no, there were people imprisoned for Video Nasties, unfortunately.
The artists?
So yeah, anyway, people who
right, yeah.
Dark Night of Scarecrow by Frank De Felitta, who is a pretty famous novelist who wrote Audrey Rose and The Entity, but he did not direct either of those movies. And in fact, everything he's directed seems to have not been based on one of his books. Bubba, an intellectually disabled man, is falsely accused of attacking a young girl. Disguised as a scarecrow, he hides in a cornfield, only to be hunted down and shot by 4 vigilante men. After they are acquitted due to a lack of evidence, the men find themselves to be stalked by a mysterious scarecrow. First of all, this is almost closer to Final Destination in the fact that we don't see the scarecrow doing any of this stuff throughout the movie, hardly at all. In fact, I think maybe the end is the only part where we see the scarecrow. And
not in a way like an arm comes into frame and stabs someone. It's that these accidents keep happening because these people are being stalked, or so they think.
Yeah, and so it does have a sort of Final Destination thing going on. And for a TV movie from the 80s, it is pretty violent. The part where they shoot the guy to death when he's hidden as a scarecrow.
Yeah, there's a lot of nasty elements to this movie that you wouldn't necessarily think of a TV movie as having.
And there's clever ways to cut around the violence. When a guy falls on a chipper shredder, they cut to ketchup being poured on a plate in one case. This one is sort of a slasher movie, but it's more like an EC comic revenge movie. And then also, I've read that this is the first killer scarecrow movie, but again, I don't think the scarecrow he's implied killer by the title and the final shots where he hands the little girl
that final shot, by the way, I believe the inspiration for the final shot of May.
That would make sense. though they both might have been inspired by
Oh, yeah,
Frankenstein.
sure. Fair enough. Well, certainly May is.
But this is, I think, a pretty good movie. I had never seen it before. I actually had it confused with the movie Scarecrows by William Wesley from '88, which is about some guys that I think they rob a bank and they paratrooper into a place to wait for their pickup, and they get killed by zombie scarecrows, and their bodies are stuffed with straw. But this is well acted. It was not envisioned as a TV movie. Funnily enough, it looks more like a theatrical movie than some of the other movies we're talking about.
Yeah.
Here. It's a little bit offensive that Larry Drake plays mentally disabled, intellectually disabled people in this, and then shortly after he was a beloved mentally disabled character on LA.
They really, in this movie, they really push it over the edge into distasteful, where it's like, he can't remember the letters after E, and it's like, all right. Yeah. Like, how old is he supposed to be mentally?
But it's kind of cool that like the little girl and him are genuine friends, and that the little girl becomes kind of a protagonist later. But it's really not a movie about him or her. It's really the thing that makes it not a slasher movie, I think, over almost everything else, is that it's really a movie about the guy who's led the murder, who's played by Charles Durning, who's very good, I think. But Charles Durning is really the lead character, and that's what makes it feel like an EC comic, is that it's all about his world coming down. And so his friends are dying, and he's like, oh, the old lady's doing it, and he accidentally scares her to death. So now he's in it even deeper. And he gets to the point where he's trying to murder the little girl. Like, he just has gone so crazy that he's trying to murder a little girl. And that was
I'm not a big fan of TV movies in general. The pacing, I just can't get behind. I love Duel, but I've never seen the actual TV movie cut of Duel, because the only thing that's available on home video is the theatrical. So, like, this movie has a lot of those same problems, but it is one of the better TV movies I've seen.
And I doubt that the filmmakers intended as a parable for violence against minorities, but the fact that there are early scenes that these men kill a guy in cold blood, and then because he was a pariah of the community, they're basically let off the hook. Mm-hmm. And you remake this movie and make the Larry Drake character a young black guy and his white girlfriend. You just do almost everything else the same way and shorten it up a bit, and you got material for your Tales from the Hood second sequel.
Yeah, I guess so.
I think. Yeah, I mean it's pretty good made for TV movie. I don't think it's really a slasher movie.
I think it's real close.
It's as close as you can get for TV.
Sure.
Maybe. So that brings us to
Halloween 2, which actually does have a TV cut. Which
yes, it does.
Now,
famous Halloween TV
I really
cuts.
like Halloween 2, and most of the reason I really like Halloween 2 is because of Dean Cundey. Dean Cundey's an amazing cinematographer. All those early Carpenter films and Carpenter adjacent films like Halloween 3 that he shot look incredible. And this is no exception. And I think Hospitals are creepy, and it's a hospital slasher with the Dean Cundey that's shot by Dean Cundey. So it's like it automatically gets pretty much all the way there for me. Yeah. I don't think we need to talk about this too much because, again, it's one of those movies that probably people have seen if they're interested in this. The one thing I do want to say about it is that the thing that people bring up a lot in terms of it being disappointing or shitty or like, oh, it ruined the first movie or whatever, is that it makes Laurie and Michael brother and sister, which is a bad choice that Carpenter made because he had to come up with something because I think he was contractually obligated to work on the screenplay, so he just sort of had to crank out a sequel, and this is the idea he came up with, and he admitted later it was a mistake, and it was. But the thing about it is, in this movie, it's actually a non-factor.
Yeah, it doesn't really
she has sort of a semi-dream sequence where she has flashes of remembering that, but she doesn't quite put the pieces together. And if she wasn't his sister, it would pretty much play the exact same way. The only way the plot hinges on that is that it's how Loomis discovers that he's at the hospital.
Yeah, and it could just be that he wanted to kill the person who got
exactly
away.
Right.
That would have made just
so it's not like
sense.
it changes his motivation that much. It's really in the parts Halloween 4 and 5 that the family stuff gets sort of insufferable and bad. But I will say that there is a different change in this movie from the first movie that people don't comment on as much, that I think is bigger betrayal, which is that in the first Halloween, the whole thing is that Michael Myers is this like boogeyman, he's this legend, he's the shape, but he's also Michael Myers, and it sort of plays back and forth between him being human and him being superhuman. And it exists in this sort of twilight of those two things, and that's part of what makes that movie so scary. Whereas this movie, he is just the Terminator. Like, there's a scene where he walks super slow through a glass door. And he, he'll get shot and gets back up and he gets his eyes shot out and he's still swinging. Like, he is the Terminator in this. He is the unstoppable killer before, Jason Voorhees was ever a resurrected zombie. And in general, the lack of interest in playing with ambiguity and the lack of interest in like teasing the audience and just going for a more blunt, hard approach is the betrayal of the first movie that this makes.
And I think that some people mischaracterize that as it being more violent than the other one. And I know that Carpenter apparently shot some of the violent scenes, but I think one of the best scenes is the one where he just, the boy, I don't remember what his job is. He's the ambulance guy, finds the woman who's been bled out, which is a genuine fear for me as someone who's actually been anemic and had to get blood. It's a really creepy idea, bleeding out from a small hole like that. But then he slips on the blood and knocks himself unconscious and disappears for a big section of the movie is one thing I actually really, really, really like about this particular
film. In general,
film.
The decision to not sort of play between the difference between reality and myth is that it just allows itself to go over the top. Like, it's way more colorful. There's a lot of bright colored gels.
Yeah.
There's like a scene of when Loomis is getting driven back to the hospital by the state trooper. Like, the car is just lit bright yellow and green. Like, there's bright red blood. Like Friday the 13th Part 2, this has an authority figure who gets a claw hammer to the back of the head.
As the resident Giallo guy, a lot of people think that Deep Red was the inspiration for the part where he cooks the two people in the
myself
tub.
Included. I've always thought that.
Yeah, and I think that watching it again, because it had been a while since I'd seen this, it is staged very similarly. But there's always been there's a part of me that suspects that that wasn't written into the script and that just they figured out that their location happened to have a hot tub. They're like, wait, hospitals have hot tubs? And someone probably explained why, and they didn't even hear the rest of the sentence. They just sort of, Carpenter just went, oh, we can restage that scene from Deep Red. And you have boiling people in My Bloody Valentine, the guy.
Oh, yeah.
And the dorm that dripped blood has a woman shoved into an industrial pressure cooker.
And we got the oven kill in Absurd, of course.
Yes.
I think this is a effective movie. It's one of my favorite slashers of 1981. I do also have a nostalgia for all of the Halloween sequels because I saw them as like a freshman in high school or whatever on AMC's like Fear Fest as like one big marathon, and that was like really fun. And obviously because it was AMC, they skipped Season of the Witch.
There's one scene in this movie that's similar to Final. What was the? God damn it! I'm forgetting the names of the movies we're talking about.
Final Exam.
For so long. Final Exam. There's that like one weird scene that nobody mentions in here where the cops run into a poor dude who just happens to be dressed like Michael Myers for some reason. And he explodes in fire. And they just sort of watch him burn to death and then never really care about it later. The only reason that scene exists is to make Loomis think that Michael Myers is dead, but Loomis never thinks he's dead anyway. So it's like
they just have to cut back
really
to them.
Callously murders this poor man.
And you know who the poor man is?
It's
Ben Tramer from the first film, the boy that Laurie has a crush on.
Is it?
They say it's Ben Tramer.
Do they really? I didn't even catch that. So it's even more mean-spirited.
Oh, it's so mean-spirited. Also, and maybe it was like literally like, oh no, Laurie has a crush on Ben Tramer, but we want him to her have a crush on that EMT, so let's blow up Ben Tramer.
As if teenagers don't like switch crushes. Like,
right. Also, fun fact: John Carpenter's character in The Fog is Bennett Tramer.
But he just really likes
It's a
that
weird thing. It was before. It was like, yeah, maybe I'll have a connected John Carpenter universe, and it really only got as far as Ben Tramer. But I think the score by John Carpenter and Alan Howarth is really good too. I really like the electronic version of the Halloween score.
Yeah. I actually liked it more than I just watched the other sequel, which I won't really go into, but I just watched it to watch it because I'd never seen it, the newer one, and I kind of liked this version better, even though I like some of those John Carpenter albums that have come out. I think that this was the better version of his old music.
That's funny. I didn't realize that was the second time he had scored a Halloween sequel that he didn't direct.
Yeah. Okay, so moving on,
because Saturday the 14th was on our list, but it is not a slasher movie.
I understand why people might think it's a slasher and then just include it on their list because it's called Saturday the 14th. Is absolutely
it's a monster mash movie.
It's a monster mash movie. Is reasonably charming, not particularly funny, really low budget. Directed by Howard R. Cohen. It's family friendly as hell. It's like nothing R-rated about it. There's not a single slasher callback. My Jewish grandfather would have found it hilarious. I guarantee that much.
Madman.
Yes, Madman. So I mentioned already that Madman was going to be called Cropsy and didn't get called Cropsy probably because the Weinsteins are assholes. At a summer camp for youths, cocky preteen calls out the name of a mass serial killer, Madman Mars. Suddenly, counselors are being maimed and slaughtered in various ways by the backwoodsman who has returned when his name was called. I didn't like this one as much as you, but I didn't have a problem with it either. I thought it was fine. I think there's some scenes that have some of that Sam Raimi energy. And other scenes that are really listless and kind of boring.
I just think this is the most affable slasher movie ever made. I think it is so cute. It has a weird thing where all of the characters are just super loving and nice and supportive of each other. There's there's always the little bickering and dramas that we're following before they don't matter anymore because everyone's dead. In these slasher movies. And in this one, it's like a guy is like getting a little too clingy with his summer fling. And then 5 minutes later, he stands in front of all the friends and is like, hey, I'm sorry you guys had to hear that earlier. I was being a real jerk, but I've really changed my way.
Yeah.
That's not going to be a problem. And it's like, that's literally the only non-slasher conflict in the entire movie, and they settle it in 5 minutes. And then it has the cheesiest, most soft-core, soft-focus, sensual, hot tub sex scene ever.
I called it. I said it looked like a cigarette or chewing gum commercial. It's all this soft music playing and all these lap dissolve fade things going on, and the two of them are spinning for some reason around, like they're dancing around each other, and it's self-imposed slow motion. It's not actual slow motion. The actors are moving in slow motion.
All the actors in this movie, they have an almost Troll 2 sort of a thing, where they're just
they're not bad actors.
They're just sort of guileless and all the it's all wide-eyed and big deliveries. And the whole movie is broad in that way. It kind of feels like a campfire tale, which it opens with, so I think that's on purpose. It just feels like an extended sort of campfire tale where it's all very broad strokes. And then when it does get to the gore, it is really gory.
Yeah, it's pretty darn violent. The other thing about the cast to me is that they're squares.
Oh my gosh, unbelievable!
Squares. I don't want like Friday the 13th characters are assholes, but I get the party. These guys, I'm I would maybe leave the party.
Yeah, this one you'd be like, are you guys in a cult? What's happening? Are you guys trying to bliss me out right now?
Hi, what's going on? Cult is a good way to put it. The gore is not bad. It's not extensive violence, but it's convincingly.
It is directed well enough. There's a few good sort of creepy moments of the house where Madman. What's the guy's name?
Mars.
Madman Mars is holed up in this house, and it's just kind of creepy in there, and there's a part where someone stumbling as they're getting chased, and he's like looming over them, and it's a really nice feeling slasher movie. It's not particularly scary, and it's certainly not particularly well acted, but I really enjoy it.
Final Girl, probably the second best Final Girl move.
So you told that to me, and then I watched it, and I couldn't figure out what you were talking about.
She's not really the final girl. She gets killed, but she's like pinned to the wall, and still gets a shot off. Like does she get a shot off? Yeah, and she hurts him. She doesn't kill him.
Oh, okay,
but she hurts him.
Okay. It's not like his head explodes or anything.
No, but she like still shouts and pinned against a wall and dying still manages to injure him. And if he wasn't pseudo supernatural killer.
And it's what's her name from Dawn of the Dead?
It is her. It is Galen Ross. The whole movie, I was thinking that looks like Galen Ross. And you know what? I never looked it up.
Well, I didn't realize that, but I looked at her. I'm like, she looks familiar. She looks weird. And I did not connect it to Dawn of the Dead because she looks very different, and she's playing a younger character.
Yeah. Oh man, it was Galen Ross because Galen Ross has a very Tom Petty-esque face.
But she looks a lot like a character from the Hulu show Pen 15, which is also a show about like two young teenage girls who are super guileless, except they're played by like women in their 30s. It has that, and that acting style is also in Pen 15. So I was watching it the whole time being like, man, this is some Pen 15 shit.
It's so funny that I thought that's quite a Galen Ross type. That's interesting. And it really was her this whole time. You know what? That means that I bought into her being younger than she was. I thought it was too young to be Galen Ross. Wow. I guess this was only really 3 years after she would have completed. Maybe only 2 years after she completed.
Right. Maybe she's playing much older in Dawn of the Dead.
Yeah, well, she's just playing an adult in Dawn of the Dead instead of like a camp counselor.
But she's old enough to like be surrounded by these men and be like, all right, fuckers, I know what the score is. I'm not going to let you boss me around.
Also, she's not standing next to Ken Foree, who's super tall and makes her look small. She's actually a reasonably tall person, it seems. I just think she was too big. Wow, that's really funny that I didn't pick that up. Okay, so yeah, pretty good movie. Really close to the end now. Actually, we are at the end. This is the last one.
The Prowler.
Yeah, The Prowler, another fan favorite. Genuinely pretty darn good movie from one of the best sleazy movie makers, Joseph Zito.
Not as good, I think, as Friday the 13th part, the final chapter.
No.
Which is the other slasher movie he made.
This is a good wind-up. This is a good wind-up. This is like the prep for that movie. And he also made it with...
that's right.
Tom Savini. And in the book, I can't remember what it's called now. Rise and Fall, Going to Pieces. Adam Rockoff argues that this is the best slasher effects that Savini ever did. They're pretty convincing. I think that I still like the Burnings effects more, or maybe even final chapters more. But they're pretty convincing in this movie. I think one of the big... Oh, I should say this. I really quick. A masked killer wearing a World War II U.S. Army era fatigues stalks a small New Jersey town bent on reliving a 35-year-old double murder by focusing on a group of college kids holding an annual spring dance. Anyway, there's a kill in this movie that's one of the most intense murders in any 80s slasher movies, where the killer stabs a guy in the head, and the guy is surviving, which is probably what would happen if you get your brain punctured. Depending on where it punctures, you're not going to die right away. And he keeps going, and the guy's eyes roll back. And then there's sort of like this almost suction effect, like where his head finally gets replaced by a fake head. And to me, that's one of the most intense kills in any slasher movie. But then, of course, Zito and Savini they do an even better version where the guy in final chapter gets his face caved in.
Yeah.
Which is a similar idea, but even more grisly to me. But this is just generally a well-made movie with a not particularly engaging plot.
I can't get behind this too hard because it is really slow. And not really slow because it starts off really good because it has the sort of inciting incident from the 40s. And then it jumps forward, and then not too long after it jumps forward into the 80s, you get the first murder, and the night has already begun. And that first murder and everything building up to it's really good. But there's just like a lot of super slow scenes of them investigating areas where the killer isn't.
They look for Lawrence Tierney, wheelchair guy, for like 10 minutes.
It's unbelievable, and it's not even like he's watching them from the closet or something.
No, they just can't find him.
And then it happens again at the graveyard, and then it happens again when they call to see where the sheriff is, and they have this like interminable scene where the guy who's running the motel is like, "Let me check," and then just.
I kind of like that.
It's
scene,
like at that point, it's almost like they're thumbing the nose at the audience, like, "Yeah, we're fucking wasting your time."
Themselves and exactly.
Meanwhile, there are two. There's a couple in the basement of the dance having sex, and then we never go back to them.
Yeah, it's like they've kind of.
It's actually a pretty low body count, all things considered.
Yeah, there's a couple really, really memorable kills, like four, five, maybe. It also has a weird cast because it's a bunch of vaguely look-alike. There's like an off-brand Amy Steele, the female lead. There's an off-brand Christopher Walken, who's the cop, who's the male lead. There's an off-brand Angus Schrum as a chaperone at the dance. And there's an off-brand Sid Haig as a convenience store owner. Like, I thought for a second all these people were these people. And I had to look it up and see, nope, these are just random actors from,
It has good production values.
And the... It's very similar to My Bloody Valentine. I hadn't put that together. That it's the same thing where there's something happened many years ago, and people are the killer's pissed off because they're having a dance, and they were told not to have a dance or a party, and they're doing it anyway. It's just not.
And the other thing I want to say about this movie, the thing that does make it kind of effective, is that there's basically no comedic interludes. There's no comic relief. Is the phrase I was looking for. No. Usually these movies just have a ton of kids joking and making cracking wise and stuff, and it's played as sort of a counterpoint to their eventual fates. But in this movie, it has sort of this like ominous spirit because it's like the kills start pretty quickly and there's really not much relief from it.
And there's, I think it's a little bit of a missed opportunity because it's not really about post-traumatic stress disorder, and by the time the killer's revealed, it doesn't really matter. Though the killer is played by the guy from Hitchcock's Rope.
Yep, and Strangers on a Train, Farley Granger.
I didn't even recognize him. I guess he isn't in the movie very much, but
Also,
there's a funny.
So, like I said, when I watch these horror movies again, I almost always forget who the killer ended up being. And unless there's like a lengthy scene of them explaining, like there is in like the Scream movies, I almost never remember. And in this, I was like, oh, well, it's so clearly the sheriff that clearly this is a red herring. It can't possibly be the sheriff.
But then it just is, and it's kind of, it's sort of off-putting because it's so obvious. There's a funny backstory with this one where Joseph Zito sold a script for an unrelated movie to a slummy investor who bought it on a whim, like the way he describes the story, the guy was probably on drugs. The guy backed out only weeks into pre-production and handed him this screenplay and $1 million and said, make this instead. And $1 million is better than most people get for a movie like this. So he said the screenplay wasn't terrible. So he just went for it, which, hey, go for it. I think this movie did not have a great following.
Well, there was a thing with the producer where Avco Embassy wanted to pick it up for distribution, and the producer thought that he could do better distributing it himself, and then that was not the case.
Yeah, and so hardly anybody really saw it. I don't remember it being a big deal on VHS either.
Because I always thought of this as like Prom Night and My Bloody Valentine as one of the quintessential canon slasher movies.
See, and that's, I think, and I could be wrong here, but I think that was a more recent development, and I think the only reason it was included in those is because of the fact that Zito and Savini then did Final. I keep almost wanting to call it Final Nightmare. Final Friday.
Not Final Friday, Final Chapter.
Final Friday either. Final Chapter. But when it finally came out totally uncut, on DVD, I think that's when it really blew up. I don't think the uncutness makes as big of a difference as it does for My Bloody Valentine, but it does help because the murder scenes are good and they're genuinely disturbing. I think they're good.
So this is another movie that, like we said, it kind of feels like My Bloody Valentine, and then also the ending where she's hiding and the rat walks up to her is from the ending of Friday the 13th Part 2, which this came out afterwards. But I think I read some anecdotes about it that I think come from Zito's commentary on the Blue Underground disc, and that imply that it was actually shot at the end of 1980 because there was like a scene that was shot on Halloween and it was released on like November 16th, so they wouldn't have been able to turn it around that fast. So I think it was actually shot like pretty far in advance of it coming out, which maybe ties into the whole distribution fiasco of trying to get it out there or whatever.
So yeah, actually both the last two movies we covered had some distribution issues, and which explains them coming out after all these other movies, even though they were in production before a lot of them. So that's the end.
Those are the slasher movies of 1981. If we missed something, I would be gobsmacked.
So Patrick, do you have anything to sell?
Yeah. Right now on Blu-ray from 88 Films, you can get Nightmare, and I'm telling you, you get yourself a region-free player, you watch Nightmare, you're going to have a good time. Or you're going to have a really good bad time.
Blue Underground actually just announced that they're remastering House by the Cemetery yesterday.
No, I don't know. Tracks of the Damned is still out there if you want to listen to some commentary tracks. Like I said, the Funhouse commentary track I think turned out really well. I think I've done another slasher movie at this point. I can't recall off the top of my head, but if you like my takes on movies, that's where you can find my takes on movies in excruciating detail, because we did talk for nearly 5 hours about 41 movies, but I can talk for 2 hours about one. Actually going to be on an upcoming podcast. I don't know what it's going to be called by the time it's finally done, but I was asked to guest on a podcast that covers the Texas Chainsaw Massacre minute by minute. And so I'm going to be on the episodes that cover the minutes of them going into the house and him getting hit with the meat hammer and her getting hung up on the meat hook.
That's pretty much the best.
Exactly. I was very honored when I was asked to be on those minutes. So that was 7 minutes of screen time that we talked about for 2.5 hours. Awesome. So again, excruciating detail. Thy name is Patrick.
All right. Well, I can be reached as usual at Gabe M Powers on Twitter, at Genre Grinder on Twitter, on the genregrinder.com website, and at genregrinder at gmail.com email. Patrick is on Letterboxd
that's right,
just Patrick Ripoll, correct? And I'm also on Letterboxd as Gabe Powers, and we're friends with each other. So if you know one of us, you probably can find the other one pretty easily. I'll see you next time, and Patrick and I will cover something that isn't quite this long, but will probably also be pretty long.
Can't get away from it.
All right.
At some point, because you know me, at some point we're going to do the Scream era slasher movies.
I mean, we could just skip ahead, but we could do it out of order. No one says we have to do it
at some point. All right, we got to end this. Bye. Sorry.
All right. Bye-bye.
Don't go out in the woods tonight. You probably will be thrilled. Don't go out in the woods tonight. You probably will be killed. There's a friendly beast who lurks about and likes to feast. You won't get out without being killed and chopped up in little pieces. Don't go out in the woods tonight. You probably will be thrilled. Don't go out in the woods tonight. You probably will be killed. There's a friendly beast who lurks about and likes to feast. You won't get out without being killed and chopped up in little pieces.